It's 2 p.m. on Wednesday, November 24th, 1971. It's the day before Thanksgiving when a white male jumps into line to buy a flight ticket in Portland, Oregon. He is wearing a business suit, a white shirt, and a black tie with brown shoes. He's carrying a dark briefcase. He steps in the line to buy a ticket for a flight to Seattle. He buys a $20 economy class ticket, and when the salesperson asks for the passenger name, he responds with Cooper, Dan Cooper. At 2:15 p.m., Dan Cooper boards the Boeing 727. He enters the plane and walks to the rearmost row, that being 18, and he takes a seat in 18E. He then proceeds to put on a pair of black sunglasses. Once all the passengers are boarded, he is then approached by a stewardess by the name of Florence Schaffner. She is serving drinks and starts with the last row and serves 18E first. He asks for a bourbon and 7-Up. She hands him a drink and asks for $1.25 as a charge. He gives her a 20 and she promises to bring the change once she is finished serving the rest of the economy section. Shortly before being taxied out onto the runway, Dan Cooper turns and hands Schaffner an envelope. As she thinks the man is trying to make a pass on her, she does not immediately open it, and she puts it in her pocket. At 2:58 p.m., Flight 305 takes off. The man keeps turning back and looking at her, trying to get her to open the envelope. She opens the envelope, and inside is a sheet of plain, unlined paper with the message on the back. It reads, "Miss, I have a bomb here, and I would like you to sit by me." She initially thinks it's a joke, but he responds, "No, miss, this is for real." Schaffner drops the note and gets up and sits next to the man in 18E. She again asks if he is kidding, and the man simply replies, "No, miss." His briefcase, which is sitting in 18F, is then moved and placed on his lap, and Schaffner is shown its contents, to which she believes is a bomb. She asks the man what he wants, and he responds with, "Take this down." So she takes out a pen and paper and writes, "I want $200,000 by 5 p.m. in cash. Put it in a knapsack. I want 2 back parachutes and 2 front parachutes. When we land, I want a fuel truck ready to refuel. No funny stuff or I'll do the job." Tina Mucklow had come over and picked up the note that Schaffner had dropped. She asks him if he would like her to take the note to the captain. He replies no, and that he wants Schaffner to take the note and for Mucklow to sit next to him. Schaffner gives the note and info to the captain, and she is told to remain in the cockpit until this is over. At 3:13 p.m., the flight communicates with Northwest Airlines. They tell them passenger advises he is hijacking en route to Seattle. Tina Mucklow had begun asking him questions, and if he's doing this because he has a grudge. He responds, "It's not because I have a grudge against your airlines, it's just because I have a grudge." At 3:54 p.m., the flight crew transmits, "Name of man unknown, about 6'1" high, black hair, age about 50, weight 175 pounds, boarded in Portland." At 5:15 p.m., 2¼ hours into the flight, the airplane is holding pattern over Seattle. The hijacker has become increasingly impatient. He reminds Mucklow that he had asked for his demands to be met by 5 p.m. At 5:22 p.m., the crew transmits, "The hijacker has inquired 3 times now about the chutes. He is not accepting fact they are not available locally." Finally, at 5:47, Flight 305 is on the ground in Seattle. Following the hijacker's instructions, Mucklow leaves the aircraft, collects the money bag, and brings it back to him. She then retrieves the parachutes and delivers them one by one to the hijacker. Again, in accordance with the detailed directions from the hijacker, the aircraft is refueled. All passengers disembark except for the man sitting in 18E. Upon finally receiving the knapsack with the cash, the passenger gets up from 18E and goes into the restroom at the rear of the plane. He remained there for about 1 minute and then returned to the same seat in which he had occupied the flight through. The reason for this trip to the bathroom is pretty clear. The hijacker had received a burlap sack full of loose bundles of bills, and he takes them to the restroom in order to rearrange them neatly in the bag for minimum volume. One by one, Mucklow brings in the parachutes. The first one is a chest pack that is about 10 by 23 inches. The second chest pack also contained writing on it with a white patch sewn on the container. The backpack chute that was first brought in is a civilian luxury chute, and the second one is a military nylon chute. The hijacker instructs Mucklow and the 3 flight crew members to remain on board. He lets the others leave. Cooper tells Mucklow to inform the captain that he wants to fly to Mexico City. They were to fly with landing gear down and the flaps at 15 degrees, below 10,000 feet, and the aft stairwell was to remain extended. The captain informed him that all could be done except for the aft stairwell. They needed the stairwell to be up on takeoff. He was okay with it as long as he could be shown how to put the stairwell down while in flight. At 7:36 p.m., Flight 305 lifts off again from Seattle International Airport. Once in the air, the hijacker asks Mucklow to show him how to lower the aft stairwell. She shows him how to, but does not do it as she is worried that she will be sucked out if it is opened. He tells Mucklow that he does not need her help and that she can return to the cabin and not to come back out. Tina Mucklow would then return to the cabin, and this is the last face-to-face interaction with the hijacker. At 7:44, the flight crew makes a note, no contact with the hijacker, air light still on. At 8:05 p.m., Flight Operations takes down a note, last contact with hijacker, and that they were receiving some oscillations in the cabin. It is not clear what time the hijacker jumped, but from 8:11 p.m. onward, the flight crew of Flight 305 believed that he was still on board. On descent toward Reno at 10:36 p.m., the flight crew tried to get a hold of the hijacker, saying, "Sir, we are going to land now. Please put up the stairs. We are going to land anyway, but the aircraft may be structurally damaged, and we may not be able to take off after we've landed." The flight crew responded back to Reno Tower saying there was no response from the hijacker about putting the stairs up. At 10:48 p.m., the flight crew made the decision to land with the air stairs down, taking the chance that the plane will be damaged. At 11:03 p.m., the flight crew reported back to Reno Towers saying, "No passenger, no damage." At 11:25 p.m. in the same evening, 4 special agents of the FBI will be inspecting the plane. On scene, the FBI found an open chest parachute in front of seat 18D. They also found an unopened parachute on seat 18B. They also found a black clip-on tie and 8 cigarette butts. With the lack of physical evidence on the plane, the FBI decided to try to begin the manhunt by figuring out when Cooper jumped. The FBI knew that the last communications with the hijacker took place at 8:05 p.m. They also know that the crew reported oscillations or vibrations on the plane for the next 10 minutes. They also knew that the plane was traveling on Victor 23. Unfortunately, the cigarette butts would eventually be lost during the investigation, so no DNA testing was ever done. Using the location of where the plane was at 8:05 p.m. and knowing that the plane was traveling on Victor 23, they decided to set up a map to show a search area. The search area included a vast area of mountains and forests that made it very difficult to search. With bad weather not helping, the FBI was never able to find anything in the first initial search area. So they went back to the drawing board and were able to come up with a secondary search location that overlapped with the initial search location, but drew up nothing. No evidence was ever found during the first 2 initial searches. On November 8, 1978, 7 years after the hijacking, a Cowlitz County Sheriff office in Washington provided a photograph to the FBI of a decal that was found. The FBI contacted Northwest Airlines, and they were able to provide a blueprint showing the location of the decal that mounts on a 727. The decal is located on the aft stairwell, which could have fallen off when Cooper was using the stairwell. But there is little evidence that the decal came from Flight 305. A far bigger piece of evidence would come into light on February 10, 1980, when an 8-year-old boy who was camping with his family was digging on the beach at Tina Bar, which is located on the Columbia River. A few inches below the surface of the sand, he found 3 bundles of decomposed $20 bills. Each bundle was held together by a rubber band, and they were intact but brittle. The bundles contained 290 or 294 bills, which had a total face value of $5,800. The FBI cross-referenced those serial numbers against the numbers of the ransom money, and it was an exact match. Tina Bar was outside of the original search locations, so it's hard to know how the money actually got to the beach. The FBI called in a professor of geology from Portland State University, who, with the help of the FBI, dug trenches at the beach, but they found no further evidence. A big problem is there's no evidence on how or when the money even got there. The U.S. Corps of Engineers reported they dredged the Columbia River in 1974. Although Tina Bar does not lie within the search regions, it is worth noting that both the Columbia and Wilmette River both have tributaries that run through the initial search locations. So the question will still remain, how did the money get there? Did the hijacker lose it when he jumped out? We may never know. By the 5-year anniversary of the hijacking, the FBI had considered more than 800 suspects and eliminated all but 24 from consideration. On July 8, 2016, the FBI suspended the investigation, having publicly identified only 3 people who they had thought to be truly considered suspects. Let's take a look at some of the suspects, starting with Robert Rackstraw, who was a retired pilot, ex-convict, and who had served on the Army helicopter crew during the Vietnam War. He was discharged from the Army shortly before the hijacking took place. The problem with him as a suspect is he had light-colored eyes while Cooper had brown eyes, and was only 28 years old during the time of the hijacking, while Cooper was described as being in his late 40s. Up next was Kenneth Christensen, who was in the Army and was trained as a paratrooper. He made occasional training jumps while stationed in Japan. After leaving the Army, he joined Northwest Orient in 1954. He became a flight attendant based out of Seattle. Christensen smoked and displayed fondness for bourbon, which aligns with the hijacker. Christensen was 45 years old at the time of the hijacking, but he was shorter and thinner than eyewitnesses' descriptions of Cooper. Up next was Richard McCoy Jr., who was an Army veteran who served 2 tours in Vietnam. After his military service, he became a warrant officer in the Utah National Guard. He was an avid recreational skydiver. On April 7, 1972, McCoy staged the best-known hijacking copycat. He survived the escape jumping out of the plane, but was arrested shortly after. The FBI does not consider him a suspect because of the mismatches in ages. Finally, Ted Braden was a Special Forces commando during Vietnam. He was a master skydiver and had short, dark hair. He was 43 years old at the time of the hijacking, and all of his features matched the descriptions of Cooper. He had had multiple run-ins with police where he was caught with stolen goods and cash. We may never know who actually got on the plane on November 1971. We may never know who D.B. Cooper was, or whether or not he actually survived the jump, or what happened to his money. But I hope this video informed you on what actually happened. Thanks for watching, everybody.